From the moment you were born, something inside you knew that the world was not built to fit the rhythm of your soul. Maybe it started in school, or perhaps it began before that, when you were too young to speak but too aware to be comfortable with the norms around you. You may have felt out of sync with the world in a way others couldn't understand. The other kids seemed to learn quickly, racing through the lessons, raising their hands, getting praised for following the rules. But you sat quietly, perhaps gazing out the window, or scribbling down thoughts that seemed far more important than anything on the chalkboard. It wasn't that you didn't care. It wasn't that you didn't try. No, you were simply wired to learn differently. From the very beginning, you could feel it, the way the world tried to shape everyone into the same mold. They wanted you to memorize facts, check boxes, and conform. But that wasn't how your mind worked. While others might have been eager to follow instructions and finish tasks as quickly as possible, your mind was constantly wandering. You were absorbing life in a way that couldn't be measured by any test or grade. You were learning through the rhythm of your own heartbeat, through the pulse of energy around you, through the deep and layered emotions that you experienced in every moment. You learned by feeling, not by memorizing. While others learned about fire from a book, you learned by standing too close and feeling the heat on your skin. While others recited the definition of love, you could sense it in the pauses between words. You didn't just take in information, you allowed it to transform you, to become part of your very being. It wasn't linear or confined by a curriculum. It was circular, deep, and full of nuances the traditional system couldn't comprehend. As you sat there in class, perhaps zoning out, your teachers saw you as unfocused or distracted. Parents might have worried, wondering why your report cards weren't filled with straight A's, or why you didn't follow the system as others did. They might have been afraid you were broken, slow, or lazy. But the truth was, it wasn't that you couldn't keep up. It was that you were walking to the beat of a different drum, a rhythm that couldn't be measured in the classroom. God knew you didn't belong to the world's idea of success. He saw something deeper in you, something sacred. While the world tried to measure your worth by grades, you were being shaped in silence, away from the applause, away from the pressure. Like a seed buried in the ground, you were taking root, growing slowly and quietly, with no one to see the work happening beneath the surface. The world couldn't see it yet, but you were preparing for something far greater than what the school system could offer. You didn't fall behind. No. You were simply rising differently. Your journey wasn't linear. It was a spiritual design, one that the world didn't understand, but that heaven did. You were meant to absorb life in a way that wasn't spoon-fed to you. You were meant to see the world with a depth and clarity that couldn't be captured on a test. Every challenge you faced, every moment where you felt misunderstood, was part of your preparation. It was a divine plan unfolding in ways you couldn't yet see. You were not broken, you were chosen. As you look back, you might realize that your mind was constantly searching for something more. While others memorized dates and formulas, you were asking why. You weren't content with shallow answers. You wanted to know the truth, the real reason behind everything. You asked questions that often left adults pausing, unsure how to respond. Why do people lie when they love each other? Why does history only tell one side of the story? Why do we memorize rules we never question? Why do we never talk about the things that truly matter, like the soul or the unseen parts of life? These questions were not casual. They were sacred. They were the fire in your spirit that drove you to search for something greater. But the system wasn't built for seekers. It wasn't built for those who wouldn't settle for easy answers. It wasn't built for those who could hear a deeper call beneath the noise of everyday life. The world wanted conformity, not curiosity. The world wanted obedience, not the courage to question. But that's what you had, the courage to ask. You were different because you refused to accept the status quo, because you were wired to seek the truth, even when it was uncomfortable or inconvenient. And though that often left you feeling isolated or misunderstood, it was never rebellion, it was reverence. Reverence for the deeper truths that others couldn't see. Reverence for a calling you could sense, even when no one else could. You didn't care about the grades, the accolades, the titles. You wanted meaning. You wanted purpose. The things that mattered to most were the things that never resonated with your soul. You could never buy into a system that measured your worth by numbers on a paper. You were called to something more. You knew deep down that life wasn't meant to be a race for recognition. It was meant to be a journey toward meaning. And though the world told you to compete, to conform, you felt a pull in your heart to connect, to understand, to question. And so, you didn't fit in. You never did. But now, looking back, you realize that was never the point. You weren't meant to fit in. You were meant to rise. You were being prepared for a divine purpose that couldn't be contained in the walls of a classroom. You were being shaped by something greater, something that would use your unique way of learning, your ability to ask the hard questions, your sensitivity to the unseen world, to bring light to places that needed it most. The struggles you faced in school, the moments when you felt lost or alone, were never about failure. They were about preparation. You were never behind. You were simply rising differently. And one day the world would see it. One day your divine purpose would unfold in ways that no test could ever predict, no grade could ever measure. You were chosen for something greater than the world could comprehend. And now it's time for you to step into it. There's something about being a seeker that makes you stand out, but not in the way you always hoped. As a child, you asked questions that others were too afraid to ask, or maybe they just didn't think to. It wasn't about simple curiosity. Why is the sky blue? Or why do birds fly? No, your questions went deeper, often beyond the understanding of the adults around you. You were drawn to answers that couldn't be found in textbooks or on a teacher's chalkboard. You longed to know the deeper meanings of life, the stuff people rarely talked about. Why do people lie, especially when they love each other? Why do we memorize history and recite dates without ever questioning the truth behind the stories we're told? Why do we follow rules that never seem to make sense without ever stopping to ask why they exist in the first place? These weren't casual questions. They were sacred. You weren't trying to disrupt the flow of things. You weren't rebelling against authority. You were just looking for something that felt real, something that felt true. And somewhere inside, you could feel it. The world around you wasn't giving you the answers you craved. While your classmates seemed to breeze through their lessons, learning what they were told and moving on to the next subject, you were stuck in a loop, questioning, wondering. Why didn't the lessons connect to the deeper meaning of life? Why did no one ever talk about the soul, about spirit, about truth beyond the surface of what we're told? These weren't trivial questions. These were the types of questions that made you feel isolated. At times, they made you feel out of place. But the truth was, you weren't out of place. You were just looking for answers in the wrong place. You see, the system wasn't built for people like you, those who ask the hard questions, those who challenge the way things are because they know, deep down, that something isn't right. The traditional classroom, the textbooks, the tests, they were all designed to teach you to memorize and repeat. But you wanted to understand. You didn't care about memorizing facts if those facts didn't lead to a bigger truth. You needed to know why things were the way they were, why the world worked the way it did, and above all, you needed to know the deeper answers about life, about people, about the world around you. And when you didn't get those answers, when the adults around you couldn't satisfy that hunger inside, it made you feel like something was wrong with you. You'd sit there in class, your mind racing with thoughts that no one else seemed to understand. You were different, and it wasn't always a good thing. Teachers saw your questions as defiance. Parents saw your refusal to accept shallow answers as stubbornness. The system didn't know how to deal with someone who couldn't be contained by a formula, someone who couldn't simply memorize and spit out facts. It wasn't that you didn't care. Quite the opposite. You cared too deeply. Your heart and soul longed for answers that the world couldn't provide. And so, you were often misunderstood. The questions that burned in your heart, questions about love, about truth, about why the world worked the way it did, were seen as a distraction. You might have been labeled as difficult, rebellious, or even arrogant. But in reality, You were just someone who refused to accept easy answers. You were someone who knew, deep inside, that there was more to this world than what was being taught. You didn't fit in because the world wasn't designed for you. The world wasn't built to nurture seekers like you. It wasn't built to encourage the kind of questions you were asking. And because of that, you often felt isolated. You felt like you were standing on the outside, looking in, like everyone else knew something you didn't, something you desperately needed to understand. But what you didn't know back then was that this was all part of your journey. This struggle, this feeling of being out of place, it was never meant to break you. It was meant to awaken something inside you, to prepare you for something greater. The questions you asked, the ones that made adults pause, were never rebellious. They were reverent. They showed a deep respect for truth, for meaning, for the deeper things that most people never bothered to look for. And in that respect, they weren't just questions. They were a calling. They were signs that your soul was destined for something higher than what the world could give. You weren't being rebellious. You were being spiritually aware. You were being prepared for a path that few would understand, but a path that was uniquely yours. But let's pause for a moment and think about the bigger picture. All those questions, all that searching. What if it was all part of the divine design? What if, even then, you were being shaped and molded for something far greater than you could have imagined? While everyone around you was checking off boxes and memorizing lists, the questions you asked weren't distractions. They were the whispers of your soul calling you toward your purpose. They were the first steps toward discovering who you were really meant to be. And the answers you sought, the ones that the world couldn't give you, would come. Not through memorizing facts or following the rules, but through something far more powerful. They would come through the very questions you asked, the ones that were misunderstood, the ones that made you feel like an outsider. Because in the end, it's the seekers who find the truth. And it's the ones who refuse to settle for shallow answers who will eventually uncover the deeper purpose of life. So the next time you feel like you're asking questions no one else understands, remember this: you were never meant to fit into the world's mold. You were meant to break free, to ask the tough questions, to seek what others can't see. And in doing so, you will uncover the answers that will lead you to your true calling, the one you were always destined to fulfill. As the years passed, you began to realize something that no one else seemed to grasp. You were never going to find the answers you were seeking within the walls of a classroom. You tried, didn't you? You tried to follow the lessons, to understand the subjects that everyone else seemed to digest with ease. Math, history, science, they were all valuable, no doubt. But to you, they felt incomplete. They didn't satisfy the hunger inside you. You weren't just looking to understand how things worked. You needed to know why they worked the way they did. Why was the world built this way? Why did it operate on these rules that, to you, felt limiting and narrow? You remember the frustration of sitting in class, feeling your mind wander, as the teacher droned on about formulas, equations, and events from the past that, while important, didn't seem to answer the deeper questions that gnawed at your soul. Your classmates, the ones who were eager to raise their hands, get the answers right, and finish assignments, seemed perfectly content with these lessons. But you couldn't help feeling that there was more, so much more, that no one was talking about. You could feel it in your bones, this deep knowing that the world had bigger mysteries to offer than the one-page summaries in your history book. You didn't care about the names of kings or the dates of battles. You didn't care about solving for X or memorizing the laws of motion. You wanted to understand the invisible threads that held everything together. You wanted to know about the things no textbook ever mentioned: the spirit, the soul, the unseen forces that shaped everything we could see and touch. While others learned the formulas for physics, you were more interested in the laws of the dual. While they studied the rise and fall of civilizations, you found yourself asking why we never talked about the eternal truths that lay beneath those histories. You were searching for something deeper, something far beyond what the curriculum offered. Because of that, you felt more and more disconnected from the traditional education system. It wasn't that you weren't intelligent or capable of learning. No, you were absorbing so much more than anyone could see. But what you were learning couldn't be measured in tests, grades, or report cards. It couldn't be captured by formulas or memorized facts. It was the quiet knowledge you gathered late at night, under the stars, when your heart and mind felt most alive. The textbooks couldn't give you the answers, and the teachers couldn't understand your hunger for something beyond their lessons. And so, you were left feeling misunderstood, disconnected from the very system that was supposed to be shaping you. But the truth is, the system wasn't designed for you. It wasn't meant to nurture the kind of curiosity you had. The world around you tried to teach you how to memorize, how to recite, how to follow instructions. But you weren't meant to be shaped by that kind of learning. You were meant to be shaped by something far greater. You were meant to feel the pulse of life around you, to tune into the deeper rhythm that couldn't be heard with the ears, but only felt with the soul. While others were getting grades, you were receiving wisdom. While they were learning how the world worked, you were learning why it worked the way it did. And yet, the more you questioned, the more you felt isolated. Your questions were not the kind of questions that got you praise or approval. They didn't fit into the neat little boxes that the world wanted to put you in. You asked about truth, about love, about justice, things that couldn't be captured in a multiple-choice test or a memorized speech. You were trying to understand the deep mysteries of life, the spiritual truths that others seemed blind to. And the more you sought those answers, the more you felt the gap between you and the world around you widening. You weren't lazy, you weren't unfocused, and you certainly weren't broken. You were a seeker, a soul searching for something that the world couldn't offer. While others were content with the surface, you were diving deep into the heart of existence, asking questions that rattled the very foundation of your being. And though it sometimes felt like no one understood, like you were the only one who cared about the deeper things, know this: your soul was on a journey that few others would understand, but that would ultimately lead you to your divine purpose. You weren't meant to fit into the mold that the world had created. You were meant to break free from it, to rise above it, and to find answers that no one else could find. Your desire for deeper meaning wasn't a weakness. It was your greatest strength. It was the compass that would guide you through the confusion, through the isolation, and through the struggles. It was the fire in your heart that would lead you to the truth that no textbook could ever give you, the truth that was written into your very soul. And so, you kept searching, even when it felt like you were standing alone in a sea of people who didn't understand you, even when it seemed like no one cared about the questions you asked or the deeper meaning you sought. You kept searching because you knew, deep inside, that this wasn't just a phase. It wasn't just youthful curiosity. This was a divine calling. You were meant for something far greater than what the world could offer. And though the system couldn't teach you what you needed to know, God was preparing you in ways no one could see. You were never meant to be satisfied with easy answers. You were meant to be a seeker, a questioner, someone who would never settle for the surface-level truths that the world handed out. You were meant to find the deeper meaning of life, to uncover the sacred truths that others couldn't see. And one day, when the time is right, you'll realize that the struggles you faced, the isolation, and the feeling of being misunderstood were all part of the divine design that led you to where you are now. You were never behind. You were simply learning in a different way, a way that the world couldn't measure but that heaven always understood. You began to notice something that no one else seemed to understand. Your mind wasn't meant to be confined by the boxes of school. It wasn't that you didn't try. No, you tried. You really did. You gave your best effort, sat through the lessons, and completed assignments. But when it came to things that didn't resonate with you, when the material felt disconnected from the deeper questions swirling in your mind, your focus started to slip away. You couldn't pretend. You couldn't just give the answer they wanted, regurgitate the information, and smile like everyone else did. There was no room for faking it, not for you. And that's where things got complicated. The world, Teachers, parents, even your peers didn't understand. How could you not care about grades? How could you not be excited to memorize the next list of facts for a test? Why didn't you engage in the things that everyone else seemed to love? But the truth was, you couldn't pretend. You couldn't pretend to care about solving equations that didn't connect to the big picture in your mind. You couldn't pretend to be passionate about the wars and leaders you learned about when the real question was always, why? Why did history repeat itself? Why did we learn one side of the story and never question the rest? You weren't lazy. You weren't unfocused. You simply couldn't engage in something that felt shallow to you. There was too much noise in the world, too much distraction, too many things being taught without the deeper meaning behind them. You couldn't engage in learning that lacked passion, creativity, or heart. It wasn't about disinterest. It was about discernment. You were picking up on the fact that the things you were learning weren't feeding your soul. You wanted depth. You wanted truth. And the answers you were seeking couldn't be found in textbooks or lectures. They were hidden in the quiet spaces, the moments of reflection, the deep questions you had that no one could answer. In a way, you were protesting, not in a loud, obvious way, but through your refusal to fake it. You refused to play the game, to act like the system had all the answers when you knew deep down it didn't. While others rushed to complete assignments, fill in the blanks, and score well on tests, you felt like you were being asked to put a mask over your true self, to pretend that what mattered to them mattered to you. But you couldn't. You couldn't silence the voice inside that told you there was more to life than grades, than memorizing, than fitting into the neat little boxes they wanted you to stay in. And that, of course, made you feel out of place. It made you feel like there was something wrong with you. Why couldn't you just do what was expected? Why couldn't you just follow the instructions, raise your hand, take the test, and get the gold star at the end of it all? Why couldn't you, like everyone else, just perform? It was like there was a disconnect between your soul and the world around you, a gap that made you feel like an outsider. But here's the truth that no one told you back then. Your refusal to engage in something that didn't resonate with you was not failure. It was discernment. It was a quiet protest against a system that couldn't see the depth of your soul. You weren't lazy. You weren't disengaged. You were just being prepared in a way that no one could understand. You were being shaped by something higher than a textbook or a classroom could provide. You weren't meant to fit in. You were meant to stand out. Imagine for a second, what if that struggle wasn't a sign of weakness? What if it was a sign of strength? What if, all along, your inability to pretend and follow the crowd was actually a divine design? You weren't meant to memorize facts and regurgitate them. You weren't meant to live for grades or titles. You were meant to live for truth. Your soul wasn't wired for conformity, it was designed for purpose. And that purpose required you to dig deeper, to question more, to explore things that others weren't even brave enough to think about. But in the moment, that struggle, the isolation, the feeling of being different, was tough. It made you feel like you didn't belong. It made you question yourself, your worth, and your place in the world. When everyone else was getting praised for being able to do what the system asked of them, you were left wondering why it didn't feel right to you. And that questioning spirit, the very one that got you labeled as distracted, difficult, or lazy, it was the exact thing that would one day set you apart. It was your gift, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. You couldn't fake it, and that was okay. You weren't supposed to. You were meant to rise above the noise. You were meant to listen to that inner voice that told you there was more to life than what you were being taught. You were meant to use your gift of discernment, to see through the superficial and into the deeper meaning of things. You were meant to search for answers that weren't in the textbook, but in the quiet of your own heart. And now, as you look back, you realize it wasn't about failing to fit into the system. It was about not letting the system define you. It was about rejecting the world's shallow definition of success and refusing to let that determine your worth. You were never meant to be just another student following the rules. You were meant to be a seeker, a truth teller, someone who would one day help the world see that the answers they needed couldn't be found on a test, but in the depths of the heart and soul. So the next time you feel like you're not fitting in or following the script, remember this. The world wasn't built for people like you. You weren't meant to be a cog in the machine. You were meant to break free and search for the truth, to follow the path less traveled. And in doing so, you will discover the purpose that has always been yours. A purpose that couldn't be shaped by tests, grades, or approval. It was shaped by something far greater. And it's that purpose that will one day guide you to the answers you've always sought. As you moved through school, you began to realize that there was something even deeper at play. Something no one else seemed to understand. Your sensitivity was not a weakness. It was a gift. At times, though, it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a burden. You felt everything, every shift in emotion, every change in the atmosphere. You could walk into a room and instantly sense if something was wrong, even when no one else seemed to notice. It wasn't always easy. It wasn't always something you could explain to others. You were constantly attuned to the energy around you, the undercurrent of emotion that most people didn't even realize existed. And this sensitivity, which others often labeled as being too emotional or too sensitive, was your spiritual radar. You could feel things in a way that others couldn't. It wasn't just about picking up on moods. No, it was more than that. It was like you had this invisible antenna constantly tuned into the emotional frequency of the room. When people were hurting, you could feel it. When someone was lying, you could sense it. And when the world felt off balance, when the pressure of the outside world seemed to overwhelm everyone around you, you were the one who felt it the most. While others seemed to be able to move through life, oblivious to the emotional turmoil, underneath the surface you couldn't escape it. You absorbed it all. There were moments when this felt like a curse. When you couldn't explain why you felt drained after spending time with certain people, or why your emotions seemed to swing so wildly in response to the energy in a room. You might have wondered why you were always so in tune with the unseen, while everyone else was content to ignore it. But the truth was, this wasn't a weakness. This wasn't something you needed to fix. This was part of your divine design, your spiritual inheritance. Your sensitivity was your strength, your gift, and your greatest tool. While others were learning facts and figures, memorizing the laws of the world, you were absorbing something far more valuable. You were learning to listen to the energy of the world. You were learning how to tune into the unseen forces that shaped everything around you. This sensitivity made you different from everyone else. Yes, it made you feel like an outsider at times. But it also gave you something extraordinary. You could sense the pain in others, the unspoken truths that people tried to hide. You could feel their joy, their sorrow, their fear, even when they weren't saying a word. It was a gift that allowed you to see the world in a way no one else could. But here's the twist: the world wasn't ready for you. It wasn't prepared for someone who could pick up on everything. It wasn't ready for someone who could feel every shift in energy, who could sense things before they even happened. And so, instead of embracing this sensitivity, the world tried to suppress it. It tried to convince you that you were too much, that you needed to toughen up, that you needed to stop feeling so deeply. Teachers, friends, and even family might have told you to calm down, to stop being so sensitive. But what they didn't realize was that your sensitivity wasn't a flaw. It was a gift, and one that would one day be your greatest strength. The world often told you that the way you felt was too intense, that you needed to learn how to shut it off, to fit in. But what you didn't know at the time was that you weren't meant to fit in. You were meant to rise above. Your sensitivity was your spiritual radar, guiding you to truth and discernment. While the world was focused on facts and figures, you were tuning into something deeper, something that couldn't be measured by grades or tests. You were feeling the pulse of the universe, the unseen forces that move through everything. And, though it often felt like a burden, it was actually your greatest gift. There were times when you couldn't make sense of it all. You'd feel overwhelmed by the emotions of others, by the weight of the world's pain, and it would leave you exhausted. But in those moments, you were being shaped for something greater. You were being prepared to use your sensitivity to help others, to see things that others couldn't see, to feel things that others couldn't feel. Your gift of discernment, of being able to see beyond the surface, was something the world needed more than anything. It wasn't about fitting into the world's standards or following the crowd. It was about embracing who you truly were, even when it felt uncomfortable. Think about the moments when you felt overwhelmed, when the weight of the world seemed to rest on your shoulders. Those were the moments when your sensitivity was being refined, when you were learning how to navigate the unseen currents of life. Your ability to feel deeply, to understand people on a level that others couldn't, would one day be the thing that set you apart. Your gift wasn't about being too emotional. It was about being spiritually aware. It was about having the ability to see through the noise, to understand the truth beneath the surface. And as you grew older, you began to understand something important. The sensitivity you once thought was a burden was actually a gift from God. It was your spiritual inheritance, your tool for discernment. You could feel the emotions of others because you were meant to help them. You could sense the unseen because you were meant to bring it to light. Your ability to feel deeply, to understand the emotional energy around you, was something sacred. And the more you embraced it, the more you realized that this sensitivity wasn't something to hide. It was something to cherish, something to use for good. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by the emotions around you, when you feel like your sensitivity is too much to bear, remember this: you are not broken. You are not weak. You are a light in this world, and your sensitivity is the beacon that guides you to the truth. You were never meant to numb yourself or shut off your emotions. You were meant to feel deeply, to see the unseen, and to use your gift to help others. Your sensitivity is a divine gift, and one day, the world will need it more than ever. By now you've come to realize that your journey through school wasn't just about fitting in, or succeeding by the world's standards. It wasn't about grades, report cards, or following the typical path. No, there was something much deeper going on. While everyone else was caught up in the race for recognition, awards, and titles, you found yourself feeling out of place. You couldn't buy into it. The pursuit of achievements, the endless chase for validation, it never seemed to resonate with you the way it did with others. And as much as you tried to understand, something inside you kept whispering, "This isn't it. This can't be the end-all, be-all of life." Why was everyone around you so focused on success, on competition, on being the best? It felt like the world was telling you that your worth was tied to your performance, to your ability to memorize facts and meet expectations. But you knew deep down that something was missing. You sensed that there was more to life than simply winning a race or being the loudest in the room. The world, it seemed, was stuck on this idea that success could be measured by scores, awards, or titles. And yet, you couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to life than just a checklist of achievements. The thought of living for these things left you feeling empty. You were different. You didn't value success the way others did. To you, success wasn't about the shiny awards, the diplomas, or the titles you could hang on your wall. It was about something far deeper, far more meaningful. It was about purpose. You weren't interested in climbing the ladder just for the sake of climbing. You wanted to know that each step you took, each move you made had meaning. You wanted your life to matter. You wanted your actions to speak louder than any degree or trophy could. But the world, as you began to notice, didn't share the same values. It was obsessed with achievement, with external markers of success, with titles and recognition. And as you watched those around you race toward these worldly goals, you felt like you were on the outside, looking in. You weren't interested in competing for the same things they were. And this made you feel like an outsider, like you didn't belong in a system that didn't speak to your deeper purpose. You started to feel like you were swimming upstream, and everyone else was following the current in the opposite direction. And yet, there was something in you that refused to conform, something that told you, there has to be more to this. You weren't lazy, you weren't disinterested, you just couldn't pretend. You couldn't fake it. You weren't willing to chase after hollow goals just to get a pat on the back or a trophy to show off. Your soul was calling for more. It longed for depth, meaning, and a purpose that transcended the surface-level rewards the world held up as the ultimate prize. You couldn't settle for just being another cog in the machine, ticking off boxes, following the same paths that everyone else seemed to take. Your spirit was meant for something else. The world tells us to compete, to fight for the best grade, to climb the corporate ladder, to become somebody. But what if all that effort, all that striving, was missing the point? What if success wasn't about winning the race, but about running with purpose? You could feel it. Your soul knew that true success wasn't found in competition. It was found in connection. It was found in following your calling, in doing work that had meaning, in creating a life that reflected your values, your passions, and your gifts. This is where you began to see the difference. While the world focused on external validation, you were learning to tune into something much deeper, the call of your soul. You didn't need validation from the outside world. What you needed was to connect with your purpose, to listen to that still, quiet voice inside that told you where to go, what to do, and how to serve. It wasn't about titles. It wasn't about awards. It was about walking in your truth, about living authentically and sharing your unique light with the world. And as you stepped further into this understanding, something shifted within you. The pressure to succeed by the world's standards began to fade. You stopped measuring your worth by report cards or the opinions of others. You realized that true success wasn't about impressing others with your accomplishments. It was about living a life that reflected who you really were. It was about using your gifts, your talents, and your heart to make a real difference in the world. You may have felt like an outsider in school, like you didn't fit in, like you didn't belong, but in truth, you were never meant to fit in. You were meant to rise above, to go beyond the shallow goals that society places in front of us, and find your true purpose. The things that mattered to others, grades, achievements, recognition, were never going to fulfill you. What would fulfill you was walking in your own unique path, creating meaning in everything you did, and refusing to settle for anything less than authenticity. In the end, you came to realize that you were never behind. You were simply seeing the world differently, and that was your strength. While others rushed to meet the world's expectations, you were quietly carving out your own path, one that was aligned with your true self, your deeper calling, and your purpose. The world may not have understood you then, but it will. In time, your authenticity will be your greatest success. So the next time you feel the weight of the world's expectations bearing down on you, remember this. You are not here to chase after someone else's version of success. You are here to create your own, one that is rooted in meaning, purpose, and connection. Your true success lies in walking your own path, in living authentically, and in embracing the gifts that make you uniquely you. By this point, you've begun to notice that everything around you, everything you were taught to value, just felt off. You were taught to follow the rules, to memorize, to get the answers right, and to stay in line. And yet, no matter how hard you tried, something always felt missing. While others were content with reciting textbook facts or focusing on what was right in front of them, your mind was always reaching for something deeper. You couldn't just accept things at face value. You didn't want to just know how the world worked. You wanted to understand why it worked the way it did. In the classroom, while the others were busy marking off items on their to-do lists, checking off boxes following the right steps to success, you were sitting quietly, often lost in thought. You'd gaze out the window or look down at the pages in front of you and feel disconnected. It wasn't that you weren't capable of doing the work. It wasn't that you didn't try. You did. But there was always something deeper that you craved to understand. There was a hunger inside of you for answers that went beyond the surface level. And no matter how hard you searched, the textbooks, the assignments, and the system couldn't give you what you were looking for. While your peers were focused on the lesson at hand, memorizing definitions or learning how to solve problems with formulas, your mind wandered to places that couldn't be captured by equations or dates. You asked questions that no one else seemed to be asking. questions that, at times, even felt uncomfortable. Why were we only taught one side of the story? Why did we memorize things we never questioned? Why did the world seem to move so quickly without ever stopping to ask why we were doing what we were doing? You wanted answers to the bigger questions. It's about purpose, truth, and the deeper meaning of life. And in your heart, you knew the answers couldn't be found in a textbook. They had to come from somewhere else. In those moments when you found yourself questioning everything, you probably felt like an outsider. Maybe you felt like you were the only one who could see the world differently, who could sense the emptiness behind the hustle and bustle of everyday life. While everyone else seemed to be moving forward, checking their boxes and doing what was expected, you felt stuck. You felt like you were on the outside looking in, like you didn't belong. But here's the thing. You weren't stuck. You were just seeing the world through a lens that no one else could understand. And that made you feel isolated. But that isolation? It wasn't a curse. It was part of your calling. The questions you asked, the ones that made others uncomfortable, were not signs of rebellion. They were signs of something deeper. They were signs of your soul's search for truth, for meaning, for purpose. You were never meant to accept easy answers. You were never meant to settle for shallow solutions that didn't resonate with your spirit. You were meant to search for something greater, something that went beyond the limits of what the world could offer. And the more you asked those questions, the more the world seemed to push back against you. Teachers called you difficult. Classmates thought you were odd. But deep down, you knew something they didn't. You knew that the answers weren't in the classroom. They were somewhere else waiting for you to find them. What you didn't realize at the time was that your inability to fit into the traditional system, your refusal to simply memorize and regurgitate, wasn't a flaw. It was your gift. You were a seeker, someone who was born to look beyond what the world presented. You weren't meant to just follow the path laid out before you. You were meant to forge your own. And that's where the magic began to happen. You started to see the cracks in the system, the places where it didn't quite fit, the areas where the world tried to squeeze you into a box that you just couldn't fit into. And though it often felt frustrating, even painful at times, this sense of not fitting was never a sign that something was wrong with you. No, it was the universe's way of showing you that you were being prepared for something far greater than you could imagine. You were being prepared to break free from the mold. You were being prepared to go after your truth, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it might be. The system couldn't contain you. And that was okay. In fact, it was more than okay. It was exactly how it was meant to be. In those moments of frustration, when you felt like you were different, like you couldn't fit into the rigid structure of the world around you, you were actually being shaped for something incredible. The world wasn't ready for you. Someone who could feel deeply, someone who could ask the tough questions, someone who refused to settle for the surface-level answers everyone else was content with. And that's when you realized it. The answers you sought weren't going to be found in the same place everyone else was looking. The answers weren't in the textbooks. They weren't in the rules. They were inside of you, waiting to be discovered. The very thing that made you feel isolated, the very thing that made you feel like you didn't belong, was the thing that set you apart. It was the thing that would eventually lead you to your calling, to your purpose. You weren't meant to fit in, and you weren't meant to follow the same path as everyone else. You were meant to lead, to discover your own truth, and to share it with the world in a way that only you could. So, the next time you find yourself questioning the system, questioning the path you're on, or wondering why you don't fit in, remember this. You were never meant to be like everyone else. You were meant to rise, to search, to question, and to find the truth that the world is waiting for. You were always meant to stand apart, and in doing so, you will change the world. By now, you've probably realized something crucial. School, society, and even the world at large were never really designed for you. You didn't fit into their neat little boxes. You couldn't be defined by their rigid rules or their narrow view of success. They told you to follow the system, to conform, to fit in. But every time you tried, it felt like something inside you was being stifled, buried beneath expectations that didn't align with who you truly were. It wasn't that you didn't try. It wasn't that you didn't care. It was simply that your soul knew that the path everyone else was following was never going to be your path. You were never meant to fit in, to quietly follow along and stay in line. You were meant to stand out, to rise above, and to do things your way. The truth is, the system wasn't built to accommodate people like you. It wasn't designed to nurture seekers, to guide those who asked the deeper questions, or to support those who felt the world on a level so profound that it couldn't be explained with just facts or formulas. You were never meant to be just another cog in the machine. You were destined for something greater, something beyond the classroom, beyond the rules, beyond the confines of what the world expected. And in those moments when you felt like you didn't belong, when you questioned why you were so different, when you were pushed into corners that didn't fit your soul, you began to realize this truth. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some cruel twist of fate. You were being set apart for a reason. You were being prepared for something far bigger than anyone could see. The struggles you faced, the isolation you felt, were never a sign of failure. They were a sign of something much more powerful at work within you. The world had its idea of success. It told you that if you followed the rules, played the game, and hit the right milestones, you would succeed. But you always knew that success wasn't about following the crowd, doing what everyone else was doing, or fitting into a mold that wasn't designed for you. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to rise. And here's where the real power lies. It's in those moments of feeling misunderstood, of feeling like an outsider, that you were actually being prepared for something great. You weren't meant to follow the world's version of success. You were meant to create your own. The world was never going to recognize your worth, and that's okay, because the value that the world couldn't see was being refined within you. The strength that you didn't even know you had was being built in the moments when you felt unseen, unheard, and out of place. The wisdom that would guide you on your path was growing in the silence, in the spaces where others couldn't see. You were never broken. You were never lost. You were simply hidden for a time, protected for a purpose. The world may not have understood you then, but it will. One day they will see that the very qualities they pushed aside, the sensitivity, the depth, the refusal to conform, were the very things that made you who you were always meant to be. These weren't flaws. These weren't weaknesses. They were gifts. Gifts that, in time, would give you the power to lead, to inspire, and to change the world. There's a story about Moses, who was hidden away in a basket as a child, separated from the world. But he was never forgotten. God had a purpose for him that the world couldn't yet see. And it wasn't until the right moment came that Moses stepped into his true calling, one that would change the course of history. It's the same for you. Just like Moses was hidden away until the time was right, so were you. You were being prepared for a purpose that no classroom could define, no rulebook could measure, and no test could evaluate. You were being shaped for something greater. David, too, was chosen in secret, anointed to be king when no one else saw his potential. Jesus himself was born in a humble manger, overlooked by the world, yet destined to change everything. And so it is with you. The world may have overlooked you, dismissed you, and tried to push you aside. But what the world couldn't see was that you were being prepared in the shadows, away from the applause, away from the spotlight. And one day, just like Moses, David, and Jesus, you would rise up to fulfill the calling that was always placed on your life. The struggles you faced in school, the moments when you felt like you didn't fit in, those were never a reflection of your worth. They were a reflection of your unique calling, a calling that couldn't be contained by the system. You were being prepared for something far greater than the world could offer. You were being trained for greatness in ways you couldn't even imagine. The very things that made you feel different, the very things that made you feel like an outsider, were actually the things that would make you a leader, a change maker, and a light in a world that desperately needs it. So stop worrying about fitting in. Stop apologizing for being different. You were never meant to be like everyone else. You were meant to stand apart, to rise above the noise, and to step into the purpose that God designed for you from the very beginning. The time will come when you will rise just like Moses, David, and Jesus did, and the world will see that the strength and the greatness were inside of you all along. You were never forgotten. You were always being prepared for your moment to shine. As you reflect on everything you've been through, you start to realize something incredible. You were never meant to be shaped by the world's standards, by its systems or expectations. You were never meant to be a product of a classroom, a job, or any external force that tried to define who you were. All along, you were being shaped by something much greater, something divine. Every struggle, every challenge, every moment of confusion and doubt was part of a process, preparing you for a purpose that was uniquely yours, a purpose that could never be confined to a test score or a grade. You see, while the world was busy, trying to shape your mind, trying to mold you into the version of success it valued, something much deeper was happening inside of you. God was shaping your soul, and as the world was pushing you to fit into its box, to meet its expectations, God was quietly working within you, preparing you for a mission that no one else could see. The pressure, the isolation, the feeling of being misunderstood, they weren't signs that something was wrong with you. They were signs that you were being prepared for greatness in ways the world couldn't comprehend. It's easy to look back and think that the system had you at a disadvantage. Maybe you struggled with tests that didn't measure your true abilities, or felt like an outsider in a world that didn't seem to understand the depth of your thoughts. But the truth is, you were never behind. You were just being shaped differently. The world may have wanted you to race through life, checking off boxes and meeting deadlines, but your journey was never meant to be a sprint. It was always meant to be a walk of purpose, one where you moved at the pace that was right for you, in tune with your soul's rhythm, not the world's. In a way, the struggle you faced was a gift. The world may have called you distracted too, sensitive, or not focused enough. But what they didn't see was that you were absorbing life in a way they couldn't understand. You were taking in the world through your heart, through your intuition, and through a deeper sense of purpose that couldn't be measured by tests or grades. Your mind wasn't meant to be bound by the rigid structure of education. It was meant to explore, to ask, to understand. While others were learning how to follow instructions, you were learning how to question the world around you, to dive deep into the mysteries that others took for granted. And as time passed, you started to understand something that the world would never tell you. The depth of your struggle was a sign of your greatness. Your soul was being shaped for something that couldn't be contained in a classroom or quantified on a piece of paper. Your journey was not about fitting in. It was about rising above the noise, about stepping into a role that was uniquely yours, and one that was being prepared for you by a higher power. Maybe in those quiet moments you questioned whether you were ever going to find your place in the world. You might have wondered why it was so hard, why everything seemed to take longer for you than for others. But now, looking back, you realize that all of it was part of your preparation. It wasn't failure, it was formation. You weren't falling behind. You were being prepared for a purpose that was greater than anything the world could offer. You were being prepared for something that no classroom, no test, no degree could define. The system couldn't measure you. It couldn't capture the essence of who you were, or the potential that lay dormant within you. But that didn't mean you weren't progressing. You were advancing in ways that couldn't be seen, in ways that couldn't be tested. While others were busy following the conventional path, you were quietly being prepared for something extraordinary. Every challenge, every moment where you felt unseen, unheard, was a step in the process of unlocking your true potential. God was shaping you in the shadows, away from the world's gaze, building a foundation that no one could see but that would one day support something great. You might have felt alone, like no one understood the way you saw the world, or like your efforts weren't producing the results everyone else expected. But that was because your success wasn't measured in the same way. You weren't here to follow the same path as everyone else. You were here to carve your own, to break free from the world's expectations, and to fulfill a purpose that no one else could carry out. And that purpose? It's about to be revealed in ways that you can't even imagine yet. Look at the story of Gideon. At first, he hid in fear, uncertain of his worth, unsure of his purpose. But when God called him, he stepped into his true identity, a mighty warrior. That same strength, that same latent power lies within you. You may have felt weak, unseen, or like you didn't fit in, but those very feelings were part of your preparation. Like Gideon, you were being called to something greater, something that would require every ounce of strength, wisdom, and discernment you've been developing in silence. You were never behind. You were just being shaped for something that couldn't be rushed. The world tried to measure you, but you couldn't be contained. Your journey wasn't about fitting into the world's expectations. It was about becoming who you were truly meant to be. And now, as the pieces come together, you'll realize that every struggle, every challenge, every moment of doubt was part of the divine preparation for your purpose. So as you step into the future, know this: you were never forgotten. You were never behind. You were being shaped all along for this moment. The world will see what was hidden in you all along, and the purpose you were destined for will unfold in ways that no system could ever define. As you look back on your journey, you begin to see something truly powerful. You were never just going through the motions. Every struggle, every moment of doubt, every time you felt like you didn't fit in, was all part of a bigger plan. You were never meant to fit into the world's idea of success. You were never meant to be shaped by its systems or judged by its standards. The world tried to measure you, tried to put you in a box that wasn't built for your soul. But every time you didn't fit, it was because you were meant for something far greater. You weren't meant to blend in. You were meant to rise. The world told you that you were too different, too sensitive, too much. But what if all of that, the things that made you feel out of place, the parts of you that others tried to suppress, was actually what made you uniquely qualified for your purpose? What if the things that made you feel isolated were actually signs that you were being shaped for something extraordinary? The truth is, you've been going through a process of awakening. You've been learning to see the world not through the eyes of the system, but through your soul's perspective. The world told you to chase recognition, to compete to be the best. But you weren't meant to chase after what the world values. You were meant to discover what truly matters, to find purpose, meaning, and truth, even when the world around you couldn't see it. You've been walking a path that was never meant to be easy, a path that no one else could walk for you. And through every obstacle, every challenge, every time you felt like giving up, you were being shaped into who you are today. The struggles you faced weren't failures, they were lessons. Each time you felt like you didn't belong, each time you felt like you were falling behind, you were actually being prepared for something bigger than you could have imagined. The system couldn't measure your worth, and that was never the point. Your true worth wasn't found in the grades you received or the titles you earned. It was found in your heart, in the depths of your soul. The very things that the world overlooked, the very things that made you feel different, were the things that made you stronger. And in those moments of struggle, when you felt lost or misunderstood, you were actually being honed, being shaped for your purpose. Now, as you stand at the threshold of what's next, you realize that all the things you went through, the confusion, the isolation, the feeling of being overlooked, were never signs that you were off track. They were signs that you were on the right path. You've been growing, evolving, even when it didn't feel like it. And now you're about to step into a purpose so big, so powerful, that it's going to change everything. You were never meant to fit into the world's system. You were always meant to rise above it. Think about all the people who were called to greatness in the Bible. Moses, David, Esther. None of them fit into the world's idea of success. They were misunderstood, overlooked, and underestimated. But in the end, they were the ones who changed the course of history. They were the ones who fulfilled their divine purpose, not because they conformed to the world's standards, but because they followed the calling placed on their lives. And now, it's your turn. The world may have tried to label you as different, as difficult, as someone who didn't fit, but in reality, it was the world that was wrong. The world couldn't see what was happening inside you. It couldn't see the strength being built in you through every challenge you faced. And now, as you look back, you realize that the struggle wasn't there to break you. It was there to awaken you. You've been preparing for this moment your entire life, whether you realized it or not. The moment is here. You are ready. The questions you asked, the things you struggled with, the parts of you that felt like weaknesses, all of them were preparing you for the greater purpose that's ahead. You've been equipped with everything you need to walk into the calling placed on your life. And now, it's time to stop looking back at the struggles and start looking ahead to the future. The future where you rise into your purpose, where you step into the greatness that was always meant for you. The world will see it soon enough. They will see the greatness that was hidden inside you all along. They will see the strength that was built in the shadows, the wisdom that was forged in the quiet moments when no one else was watching. And you, the one who felt unseen, the one who felt lost, the one who was misunderstood, you will rise. You will stand tall, not because the world told you to, but because you have finally stepped into who you were always meant to be. So take a deep breath and stand tall. You're not just walking into your future, you're walking into your destiny. You've been prepared for this moment, and now it's time to rise. The world has no idea what's coming, but you do. And that's what makes this moment so powerful. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to change the world. Hey, thank you so much for being here and listening to this message. Now, I want to hear from you. This journey we've been on together, all the struggles, the moments of feeling like you don't fit in, they're all part of something greater. But I know you've probably had your own experiences with this feeling too. So, I want to invite you to share your story in the comments below. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong? Or like the world didn't quite understand your deeper purpose? How did that make you feel? And what did you learn from those moments? Your story might resonate with someone else who's going through the same thing right now. Your words could be the encouragement someone else needs to keep moving forward, to rise into the purpose they were always meant to fulfill. So don't be shy. Share your thoughts, your feelings, and your experiences. Let's start a conversation, because we're all in this together, and your voice matters. And if this message spoke to you, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. The best is yet to come, and I'm so glad to be on this journey with you.